Welcome to my 40th TV series. On the show today, we're going to take a look at some tumbling blocks in our quilt. Today we're going to incorporate some fussy cutting into tumbling blocks. A lot of you have written and asked about how to use those embroidery designs that your machines have and use them in quilts. So I have two different quilts here before me. This one uses embroidery designs in the tumbling blocks, and this one I have fussy cut just designs in fabric. So whichever way, if you have an embroidery machine, this will be a good design for you. If you notice the designs in both, they're using the alphabet. So we have a letter and then we have a picture so that the kids that you make these quilts for can learn their alphabet. In this fabric that I've chosen here, we have the letter again and we have a design. And this one has the name of the bird or whatever it is written out. So either find your fabric or get those embroidery designs out and have fun with them. Okay, how are we going to make our blocks? First of all, we have to fussy cut. And when I use these embroidery designs, the designs were big, and so I wanted to try to find a design for my block or a size for my block that I'd really like. Now here is the inside. This is 6 inches, this opening. And this opening is 4 inches. You can see when I put the 4-inch opening that some of the design is not in there. So that would be too small a diamond. So I'm going to put this large one here. And I already have 2 diamonds cut out. For the tumbling blocks, we need a top diamond, a left diamond, and a right diamond. And so we have to cut our diamonds to correspond to those shapes. When I cut my top one, let's just bring this one back in. It's already cut. This was going to be the top. So I lined up the T on the diamond shape with the design in the fabric. And you can't rotary cut inside a shape, so I laid it on there, centered my design, lined it up with a line, then put the next smaller one in, remove this. Now I can rotary cut around the outside, and I have my top diamond. For my, let's see here, for my left diamond, I need to get the L line lined up right here. Center my design and line up the design with the L line on the diamond shape. Again, we can't rotary cut inside, so if we put this next smaller one in, remove this, now we can rotary cut our design and it's the exact size that we want. We're going to go clear off the edge of the diamond shape so that we're sure that we get this cut. And one more cut. All right here, okay. And we have our right side, so that would go here. Now, if we don't directionally cut them, let's say we wanted the owl on the top, but if it's cut this way, oh, Mr. Owl's laying on his side, and that doesn't look quite so good. Or the apple, if we had wanted to put it here, we wouldn't cut it with that angle. So we have a top, left, and a right to our tumbling blocks. Now what we're going to do is add borders. And you can see my blocks here. I've already added borders to those. I'm going to take the green fabric. I've used all primary colors, but every one of my top diamonds I've bordered with red. Every one of my left diamonds I've bordered with blue, and my right diamonds with green. So that has, you know, it carries throughout the whole quilt. So I'm going to do a green one here, and that would be this piece. Now, it makes a difference which border strips you add first, because you know, it just looks better if the seams that you see, like right here, are going in the right direction. So the left and the right diamond, I sewed the top strip on first and the bottom strip, top and bottom. And then I sewed the side strips on, so there's no seam going into here. It's just the way that it looks, and I just think it's important. If you decide you want to do it a different way, it's your quilt. The top one's done differently. We have the sides are done first, and we do this side and then the top, this side and then this one. And then we'll have a more pleasing look as our diamonds are put together. So here we have a right one, which means we're going to do the top and bottom first. And I have 2-inch strips of fabric cut. And let's just go and sew these. Now you can chain sew this. Go from one to the other. If you have all of your, let's see, I keep forgetting left and right. All of your right diamonds cut out. They're the ones that are going to have the green borders. Then you can do all of them. Now, if you can see here, I'm starting just on the green, taking a few stitches, making sure my machine's set up the way I want to. I want my needle to stop down in. Then I'm going to take the diamond and just place it right underneath there. Now you might wonder why I have my strip on top and the diamond underneath. Well, that's because I want to control the stretch of the fabric. And let me just finish here. If we had another diamond to sew with a green border, we would just cut our thread with the scissors, but then keep on sewing. Since we only have one here, we'll just do this piece, and then I'm going to take another strip of green and do the opposite side. Now once again, the strip is on top because that always has the straight of grain. That's the way it was cut. Okay, scissor that. And again, if you were chain stitching, you'd go from one to the other. Let's go and press this now. And we want to press from the right side. Press it first the way we sew it. And then let your iron come once across it so we don't do any stretching. Okay, now we have to cut the ends of these strips, and we want to do it and keep our angle accurate. And the way we're going to do that is to go back to the diamond shape and line it up right here so that it lines up with the bottom or top of the strip and with this side. Now I'm only going to cut this piece. I'm not going to come all the way down and cut this because it's just much more accurate to do one at a time. And this one, we can turn our diamond shape around, line up the side, the bottom of the strip, and cut. And now we'll go down and cut the other piece. Again, right here, line up two sides. Whenever you're working with an angle, you have to line up two sides because that's how an angle is formed. And this end right here. And you know, it's easy to know how to place the shape on here because to cut this edge, you wouldn't put it here. You can't line it up with two things. So you'll know which side to use. Okay, we're going to line up the side and the strip. And now we're ready to do the other two sides. And one thing I want to impress on you, but you'll find this out when you do it, and this is a mistake you'll probably only make once. You need to start up about this much, probably about 2.5 inches higher than this point when you're sewing. And you'll see why when we cut this strip. So I'm going to just start sewing right on the strip, about 2.5 inches down. Take my piece. Now this edge is definitely not on the straight of grain, either the edge of the green or the edge of the block itself. So having the new green strip on top eliminates any stretching that you'll get. And it keeps your block the shape that you want it to be. Now let's just take a look at this, and when we press it, it will come here, and when we cut it, that green strip will be cut at an angle. That's why we needed it longer, because we'll be cutting it this way. So let's just go ahead and press this, and then we'll cut it. Again, we want to press it the way we sewed it, and then from the right side, just once across the strip. And we just line it up, two sides, with two sides of the shape. And cut it. And then we'll cut this side. And the opposite side is done exactly the same way. You add the strip, but leave a little bit extra at the top on the strip. Press it, and then cut it in this way. Now, as I teach classes, I realize that even though you think you're using 1/4 inch, and I think I'm using 1/4 inch seam allowance, in one class there can be many different sizes that come out of that. And so I've taken that into account when I've given you the size of the strips. And after we add all 4 sides to the strip, then we take our 8-inch shape, which is exactly, see this one with the red border has been trimmed, the green border has been trimmed, the blue one still isn't trimmed. Can you see how much bigger it is? Now, if your seam allowance, the one you're using is a little bit wider than mine, your blocks will still work. And that's why I've done it that way. So I'm just eyeballing it so it's centered, and then trim off the borders here. And don't let it move. Okay, and we come here and trim it. So all our blocks will be exactly the same size after we add the borders to them. Whoops, that slipped a little, don't let it do that. Okay, and now we have our blocks cut. We have our A that goes at the top, and our B, and our C for our block. Let's just move those. And now to put our tumbling block together, which is the basis of this whole quilt, we're going to sew the B and the C block together. Just matching the top, no need to pin, and the bottom. So let's just go ahead and sew that. And just line up the edges, keep them even. After you take a few stitches, hold the 2 bottoms together to make sure they match. Line up the edge. Cut the thread. Now we're ready to press. Now usually in quilting we press to one side or the other. But when we're doing tumbling blocks, it's much easier to open that seam. And the way I have found works the best is first, press the seams to one side. the way you would normally do that. Doesn't matter which side. And then after you've pressed it from the front, turn it over to the back and press this seam allowance open. That will make it very easy for you to match the inside seam. And what we're talking about matching now is this Y seam. I think you can see why it's called a Y seam. Just move this, because it joins them together in a Y. Now, a lot of quilters tell me that they really have trouble with that Y seam. They can get it close enough, but they seem to have to take one more stitch by hand or take out one stitch to get it to lay perfectly straight. Now, the secret to getting it perfect all the time is to sew all the way into that inside point and press the seam allowance open. Then when we go to put this piece in, just lay this out, we want a guide to sew by. So that if I were to put this piece here and go to sew it, I don't know where to stop. There's no guide. So that tells you you're in the wrong place. But if we do it this way and turn it over, I have a guide right here. It's the seam allowance that I pressed open. Now, if you feel more comfortable using a pin here, put a pin in right in the center of the seam between the green and the blue, and then bring it right back out. Now let's turn it over and see on the back side. It should be exactly 1/4 of an inch, and if you can't eyeball it, measure it. Now I'm a little bit over, so I just wanted to show you that that can happen. We'll just move this just a little bit. It still has to be between the green and the blue, but we want it 1/4 of an inch on the back. So I'm going to put it in that seam line. There we go. And then bring it out the seam line. Now when I check, I can see that it's 1/4 of an inch. Measure it if you have to. That's the critical part, to make sure that's 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now we're ready to sew. And we want to sew with the red one, the new diamond, underneath, so that we can see our guide where the pin is. And we'll start stitching, make sure these points match. Hold the seam allowance down and stitch. Now I have my machine set so it will stop with the needle down. And I'm going to watch, I'm going to come, when I get to about 2 stitches away, I'm just going to turn it by hand, the wheel of the machine here, because I want to be exactly where that pin is. And then I'm going to take my straight pin out that I used to mark with, put my foot down. Okay, now that needle is exactly where it has to match. So to start sewing the next side, I'll lift it back up, but because the needle's down in there, my fabric won't shift. I'm going to bring this piece, fold it right here. This looks sometimes a little more difficult than it is. You just want to make sure that everything is laying where it needs to be before you start stitching. And you can usually feel it right there if the fabric is bunched up underneath there. Okay, and now here we have some seam lines to match. So we'll hold those in place with our fingers until we get there. Then the end. Okay, now we'll go and press this. And we should have a perfect inside point on our tumbling blocks. And I like to press my seam away from the center or the top block toward the blue and the green. So I'm just going to hold this up and roll it. And there's my point on my tumbling block. It's one of those things that when you know the techniques, it makes it pretty easy to do. Now the next step I'm going to do is to cut off these little tails here. Got one here and one here. Now, how are we going to put the quilt together? We've got these pieces. Let's take a look first at this quilt, because we're going to sew in units. And one unit would be this block and this block. And we would sew that seam together all the way to the edge and press the seam allowance open. Then this extra block here, the yellow one, becomes the top of, it's like the top here, it's going in the same direction. And here we need to put in a Y seam. So if we have this tumbling block and this one put together, we have a place for a Y seam here. So that's how that's done. And then we add this diamond, the yellow one right here, so that and that's a Y seam, but our seam will be like this. What we want to do is give ourselves as many straight lines as we can. And the next step is to this piece, we'll sew the green triangles. And so when we put them in, we have another Y seam. So there are only like 3 or 4 Y seams in assembling the quilt. So that makes it pretty easy. And once you've done this, you'll really know how to do a Y seam. Let's take a look at the corners here. Sewing corners to square up quilts seems to give people a lot of problems. So I decided to make this very easy. I have this line as the end of my blocks. So I just took strips of fabric and sewed them right sides together, pressed them, it's like a flip and sew, and kept adding colors until I could square it up with a ruler. And I did the top and the bottom the same way, and then added the yellow. This was sort of a fun quilt to make, and it was made for Lori. And when you look at the full quilt, you'll see the yellow block spell out L-O-R-I, Lori. Now let's take a look at the other piece I have here. These diamonds were cut smaller because the designs in the fabric were smaller. So I just opened up the diamond, and I saw that I could put, for instance, this swan in a top diamond by lining up the T, and I had room all the way around it. I can move it around a little bit, make way for his tall neck there. Or if I wanted to, look what happens if I open up the 6-inch. See, I get too much of these other pieces around there. So I went back to this size. And when I got it centered the way I wanted it to be, then I took the next smaller size, put it in, removed this, and rotary cut around it. So these centers on these blocks were cut 4 inches in 4-inch diamonds, where the other ones were cut into 6-inch diamonds. So let's take a look at this quilt. In here, I've put in some solid diamonds. It doesn't spell anybody's name. And so we have a tumbling block, and we have, you can either do the triangles to make it a piece and put this in, or you could do it this way and put the yellow diamond in. As long as you give yourself a straight line to add the next piece in the tumbling block fashion. And if you look at the bottom of this, I didn't square it off. This is a wall hanging. So I just left the bottom in the shape of the diamonds that are on the particular quilt. So it makes it pretty easy, whether you want to do the embroidery or whether you want to do a design from a fabric, either one. But decide for yourself, based on your design, how big you want your diamonds. And then go ahead and have fun with it, add borders, and quilt it, and you're finished. I hope you have enjoyed this project. This is the last show in our series, our 40th series on quilting on TV. And in this series, I've included stars, paper piecing, trees, quilt as you go, Bargello jackets, flying geese, bags, baby quilts, lots of different projects so that we have something for everyone, the beginners and the more advanced quilters. I hope you have enjoyed this series, and be sure and join me when we come back with our 41st TV series. Thank you.
For information on today's main demonstration, call 1-800-248-KAYE. That's 1-800-248-5293. Or write to us at Kaye's Quilting Friends, Post Office Box 456, West Branch, Michigan, 48661. Please remember to specify the program number. Kaye's Quilting Friends is brought to you in part by Janome America, Clover Needlecraft, Ottlight Technology, and Lazy Girl Designs. Our thanks for joining us for this edition of Kaye's Quilting Friends. We hope the ideas shared with you in this program will make your quilting more enjoyable. Please join us again on the next Kaye's Quilting Friends.